The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Monday, the 5th of January, 2026. We are live here at CHD TV. We have a very important show for you today. I'm going to be going to Brian Hooker, our Chief Scientific Officer, in a second to have a very important CHD science update. But then please stay tuned because we have critical call to action, very important, with Dr. Alexandra Muñoz, and she's going to be talking about the pesticide liability shield. This is very, very important. Stay tuned for that. And then we're going to be showing our measles panel from the conference. So let's get straight on with it. Good morning, Brian Hooker. How are you?
Hi, Polly. Doing so good. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year to everybody. All right. Well, exciting things going on in the Science Department at Children's Health Defense. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. We have a new publication that came out as a preprint that is really startling and pretty dangerous stuff. We've been working with the state of Louisiana, and we were able to get their infant mortality data for the last 10 years. And we took that and we cross-referenced the vaccination data for those infants who died. And we looked specifically at the 2-month vaccines because you can get upwards to 6 different vaccines at the 2-month well baby checkup. And what we found was that if they got just one vaccine, then the risk of death, the risk of infant death, and a variety of causes of infant death. Some were SIDS, some were suffocation. They never coded as vaccine injury, even though, a lot of them seem very, very obviously a problem with the vaccine. But the more vaccines that these children got, the worse off that they were. And sort of the worst offender was a 6-in-1 vaccine that's used in the United States called Vaxilus. Vaxilus has hepatitis B, it has Haemophilus influenza, it has polio, the DTaP vaccine, and I believe I might be missing one as well, but it has 6 different antigens, and it's a 6-in-1 vaccine. And we saw that the rate of infant death in the 3rd month following those vaccines, the rate of infant death was 2 times higher, okay, in those infants that got the Vaxilus vaccine versus those that didn't get the Vaxilus vaccine. And interestingly enough, females tend to have more of a robust immune response, especially at that age. So we saw a more significant correlation in female babies who are dying after getting this 6-in-1 shot. We were very, very fortunate. We put this out as a preprint before Christmas. It is going to be submitted to a peer-reviewed journal and in short time, and we're working with the state of Louisiana. Obviously, they're very, very concerned about our initial results, and we hope to be able to continue to work with them in order to get additional data so we can look at other indications. Vaccine injury, it includes infant death, but there's a lot more that goes into vaccine injury. And so we're very, very excited to be able to continue to work with them. And hopefully, people will stand up and take notice of what we're doing with this bloated vaccination schedule.
Well, that's quite right. And the other interesting thing is when we speak to pediatricians who do not vaccinate, they do not have any SIDS in their offices. So that has to be looked at as well. And the other question I have for you, and you may not be able to answer this because I think this is the big question everyone wants answered. What is it in those vaccines? Is it the aluminum, the adjuvants? What is it that's causing the brain swelling and the death? Or is it the fact that it's just an upload of just total crap?
I think it's a combination of the different toxic components. Aluminum is huge. There's over 1,000 micrograms of aluminum are given in that 2-month well baby checkup, if they're on the current CDC schedule. And in addition to that, you have things like lipopolysaccharide that is neuroinflammatory. It's obviously very, very much neuroinflammatory. So, I think these kids go into a neurological crisis very, very quickly. The 1-2 punch is that aluminum adjuvant, and then some of the components that are associated with like bacterial cell walls, like lipopolysaccharide, that are contaminating vaccines that are really causing the problem.
And HHS are aware of the study you've done?
As far as I know, we haven't. It hasn't been out as long as we would want it to be out, and so as far as I know, HHS is aware of this particular study, and we're also working with other states now that are coming forward with similar data to be able to analyze, increase our cohort size, look at different states, and the big issue is the CDC should be releasing the vaccine safety data link for independent scientists, independent researchers. That would be the holy grail. It should have been done years and years and years ago, but there are select few that are still at HHS that are withholding that information. If we had that information, Polly, we could show so much, and we could find out so much about the dangers of the vaccination schedule. And, instead, it's highly, highly censored. Only studies that really are going to promote vaccines are ever embarked upon in the vaccine safety data link. And independent scientists like me, we're just, verboten.
Well, it's fabulous work. Thank you. And you have more to tell us.
Yes. Yes, the second paper that came out early in December is a paper called The Neuroimmunology of Autism. And this was published in a PubMed index journal called Molecular Neurobiology. It was done by my colleague from CHD, Jeet Varya, Martha Herbert, formerly from Harvard University, and myself. And we really wanted to put a stake in the ground with this, that autism is not a genetic disorder. Autism is not just a neurological disorder. There is an immune component. There's a very, very strong immune component. And that immune component can be and is elicited by vaccines. Once you start to mess with the immune system, that causes a neuroimmune response in the brain, and it causes neuroinflammation. We've seen it directly. Looking at the literature, there are now scientific papers showing that the immune cells of the brain actually sustain brain damage because of the neuroinflammatory response. And so there's no denying when these talking heads get out, like Paul Offit and Stanley Plotkin or whomever, and say, "Oh, it's genetic, it's genetic, it's genetic." They're so full of it. They're absolutely wrong. And so this is our stake in the ground. We're really, really fortunate that we were able to get this published, and check it out.
And this is really, really important to the 1 in 31 or whatever their stats are now of autism. So to the parents listening now, you were right all along when you said my child declined after a vaccine, or whatever your story is of what happened to your child. You were right. Brian Hooker and his team have just proved you it is not a genetic disorder. It is something that happened to our children. This is huge news for us parents.
Absolutely. And when there's a neuroimmune component, then you can't take vaccines off the table, which is, the reason why we get gaslit. There's a reason why, autism is genetic, no matter, what talking head is saying it. There it is, a very, very strong genetic component, which, to me is like nails on a chalkboard, because nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, there is a genetic component. Yes, there is a genetic susceptibility, but vaccines are a huge trigger for autism. Acetaminophen use, especially during the neonatal period, that first year of life, also a huge, huge trigger for autism. And we need to spread the word that the autism rates need to come down. 1 in 31 and higher is not sustainable. It will grind the nation to a halt.
Not to mention us, the parents, who are exhausted. And many people just come back from Christmas. Everyone's like, "Did you have a great time?" A lot of parents really did not. It is exhausting, and it's over triggering for the children with these issues. It's awful. So let me just summarize this up before we go on to the next one. So
Yes.
the first paper, you're basically Children's Health Defence Science Department under your chief, you're in charge. We basically just discovered that yes, SIDS can and is caused by vaccines. You, the parents who suffered that, you were right. Secondly, autism, it's not genetic. It's caused by our vaccines or an environmental trigger. We know what it is with each of our story. So you have just discovered two massive things that we knew all along, but you proved it. And that is huge for 2026 to go in to Children's Health Events live on CHD TV. We are gaining ground.
We are absolutely gaining ground. We're able to publish in publications we've never published before. Our scientific credibility is really, really zooming. And this final paper that we have, we actually were able to collaborate with a lot of luminaries in the world of aluminum toxicology. This is with a French scientist we met, Crepeau, a scientific journalist, Jeremy Hammond, J.B. Handley, me and Carl, Luis Lujan, Chris Exley, Chris Shaw, James Lyons-Weiler. It's a collaborative effort, and we wanted to come down hard against the publication that came out of Denmark. The Denmark aluminum publication is pure fabrication. It's pure fraud. If you look behind, the curtain, you see that using their own data, you can show that there's a statistically significant relationship with aluminum exposure from vaccines and autism. And so, it's very, very disconcerting what they tried to do. They rolled out this paper in time for to somehow counter Secretary Kennedy and what he was saying about aluminum and vaccines. The paper should be retracted by the journal. The journal is digging their heels in the ground, and they're refusing to retract the paper. But it was, erring on the side of science, being able to work alongside these luminaries in the aluminum toxicology world. It was quite an honor. And again, a publication that was published in a PubMed index journal. This is the National Library of Medicine that we're getting into. And, it's just continuing. I think that, we can see more of that coming on the horizon in 2026. CHD Science right now has 8 papers that are in the hopper, pretty much ready to go. They're either in the peer review process or they're getting ready to be peer reviewed. That's 8 new publications, and then 10 more behind that that we're currently writing up. And so, this has been a very, very productive time for us. I'm so thankful for my staff, Carl Jablanowski, Thomas Yangst, and Heather Ray, have been with me for such a long period of time. And we're a really neat, cohesive team. And we want to impact the science. These are the studies that nobody else would do. These are absolutely the studies that nobody else would touch. And so when you see a need like that, when you see a hole like that, it's incumbent on us to fill that hole.
Yeah, phenomenal work from your department in science, department at Children's Health Events. And to the people that donate to Children's Health Events, it's because of you that they're able to do this. And if you want to donate and just earmark it to the science team, you can do that as well. If you want to see more of this, do help us here at Children's Health Events. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. Very excited to work with you, and I can't wait to see what you're going to be doing in 2026. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Polly. It's always great to be with you. You have a great morning.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, viewers. So now this is critical coming up. I'm going to read this tweet here from Children's Health Defence that came out, and it's coming on the screen right now. Well, it says this bill grants chemical. All right, here we go. Children's Health Defence tweet. Urgent. Congress is about to wipe out your right to sue pesticide companies. Quietly tucked in a new spending bill. Section 453 blocks updated health warnings and gives chemical manufacturers immunity even when people are harmed. It's cancer, Parkinson's, infertility, 57,000 plus products and zero accountability. So who better than to talk us through what is going on and how you must help is Dr. Alexandra Muñoz. Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today.
I think it's really important that you tell people exactly what's happening and how they can act, because it's a little confusing, isn't it?
It certainly is. Yeah, this is a really complex issue. So in the House Appropriations Bill during the summer, they passed out of the Appropriations Committee a version of the bill which contains Section 453, and people might have remembered hearing about that during the summer. And Section 453 blocks funding for a particular type of label update that is necessary for companies to be able to request when their warning labels are out of date from the science. So when new science emerges that shows something is a carcinogen or causes Parkinson's disease or impacts their endocrine system, it's important for the companies to be able to request an update to their warning label. And there's a provision of FIFRA, the misbranding provision, which allows companies to request that label. And this provision, Section 453, would actually block funding for the EPA to take the regulatory action to approve that label. And in doing so, it creates something called impossibility preemption, which essentially ends up where when this goes to the courts, people may be technically able to file a lawsuit at the very beginning, but eventually it will become clear that you won't be able to win any of those lawsuits, and people won't be able to sue pesticide companies for any of the products that they regulate. And that includes, as you said, 57,000 formulations. And these include household products like antibacterials, disinfectants, ant traps. It also includes all of the pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. And so it's a really wide chemical inventory that impacts farmers and families all across the country. And many Americans have been harmed by some of these products in this category already, especially Roundup. As lots of people know about, there's been a lot of litigation against Roundup. And Bayer now owns Roundup. And so they have been seeking a liability shield throughout the year. And Section 453 is just one version of their attempt doing that. And what happened over the holidays is that we learned that there was a conference committee, sort of a secret conference committee going on between the two chambers of Congress, where they're discussing the final contents of the Interior Appropriations Bill. And it sounds like they're still thinking about keeping Section 453 in it. And there could be some type of vote this week. We don't know exactly what day. We're still trying to get more information about what's going on, but it's very important that right now everybody takes a moment to contact their representatives and let them know that they don't want a spending bill to be used to give de facto immunity to pesticide manufacturers. And we're asking for Section 453 to be removed from any version of the Interior Appropriations Bill or minibus that is coming to a floor vote. So you can contact your members. And the other thing that we can do is we can go on X and spread the word about this, because it's really important that we get the word out to everyone that this is happening, because part of what they try to do is their strategy is to move this type of legislation around without people noticing. That's why it's tucked in a spending bill. That's why it's blocking labeling updates. That's why it doesn't really seem very clear what's going on when you look at that language. It's part of their strategy. They know that people don't want to give a liability shield to this industry, and they're going to use as many tactics as they can to get this through Congress. So it's very important that we stay on top of it and that we stay very loud about that nobody wants this, that people don't want this. It's a really dangerous choice for Americans' health, because the chemical inventory that is regulated here contains many known neurotoxins, many known carcinogens, many known endocrine disrupting chemicals. It's not an inert chemical inventory. These are designed to be poisons. This is a chemical inventory filled of sides, insecticides, fungicides, things that kill living biological organisms. And what we see in the toxicological data is that oftentimes these chemicals have other impacts on biological systems. And these companies need to be accountable for that, and they need to provide proper warning labels. So it's important that we stand against this.
Dr. Muñoz, the big question I have is why? Why would they pass or even think about passing something like this when we know that these chemicals are so dangerous for American people?
I honestly can't understand it, but it seems to be very much motivated about protecting this industry and protecting this business. And, there's also been a lot of misinformation in this space in particular. These companies have had very aggressive PR campaigns, and they've gone so far as to ghostwrite papers in order to fabricate data about the safety of their products. And there's actually a really recent paper that was just retracted that was the foundation of a lot of their claims about safety of Roundup. This paper right here, the safety evaluation, the Williams 2000 paper, was just retracted back in November because there's substantial evidence showing that it was ghostwritten by the employees of Monsanto. And in their process of ghostwriting, and when you read these emails, they actually talk about how they want to avoid academics because they, create problems for them. They're avoiding this toxicologist because he was going to label it genotoxic. And instead, they have their own employees write those sections. And then they talk about not including them on the paper because it would make it look like it wasn't independent. And so it was a very formulated paper to serve as the sort of the reference for glyphosate safety, for Roundup safety, to promote their sales throughout the country, to serve as the basis for regulatory decisions. And so the EPA approved label for Roundup is based in part on this retracted study. And there's also a Supreme Court case that this retracted study is now involved in. So,
Well,
yeah.
I want our people, I know the people watching here are hardcore viewers and they get it, but for the clip that's potentially going to go out on this, I want people to understand. Most people will say, well, Dr. Muñoz, I'm good. I eat organic, so everything's fine. But there's 57,000 plus products. You mentioned ant traps. I mean, there are things out there people are using that they have no idea. It's like the silent killer, isn't it? They have no idea that these pesticides and chemicals are in there.
That's right. There's many products. It does include household products like disinfectants, right? So any type of kitchen counter spray that you might use that kills bacteria, that would be regulated under FIFRA. And people's kids are exposed to those things, right? They clean the counter and then they touch the products. The types of chemicals that are used in home fumigation to deal with infestations, those are also regulated here. And, even if people aren't farmers or they eat organic, there's many people that don't necessarily know about the dangers of these home use chemicals, like Roundup, that they're using in their backyards, in their home gardens. And so, and even now, it turns out sometimes the things that are labeled organic are containing pesticides. There's a lot of missing regulation in this space. And so even though you're doing your best to avoid certain things, this can have impact on everybody, depending on where you live. There might be pesticides being sprayed nearby that could drift and impact your farmland. That's a real big problem with dicamba. There's, all kinds of things that can happen with pesticides moving into the groundwater as well, and contaminating the soil and leaving their presence on ecosystems and families in ways that we can't really predict at the time that these chemicals are, passing through the EPA. And it's really important that there's a mechanism of accountability on this industry so that as new data emerges, as lawsuits happen and discovery happens, there's more information about what's actually in these products and how these things are harmful. And, people need to have proper warning so that they can protect themselves. So all of this works together to essentially shield these companies from providing informed consent, right? There's going to be no informed consent if they get immunity, because they won't have to provide it anymore and there won't be a way to get it. And there won't be proper warning labels as a result. And so the risk on the future generation is very great. And it's something we really do need to be concerned about.
And so just so people understand, this affects, and you brought this up, your children. So if you don't care about yourself, fine. But your children are around in the house the whole time with potentially these products being sprayed around them. And some of it, we saw cancer, Parkinson's, these are serious, serious illnesses.
Absolutely.
What other things can you expect from that kind of poisoning?
Well, there's a lot of chemicals that are within the FIFRA chemical inventory that are endocrine disrupting chemicals. And those types of chemicals can interact with the hormones in children's bodies. And that can happen during many stages of development that are called sensitive windows of development, where children are really sensitive to these types of chemical inputs. That can happen in utero during pregnancy. It can happen in early childhood and early infancy. And even in those situations, small exposures that they might encounter, for example, at a playground or a public park, where you don't necessarily control what pesticides are there, they can have exposures that could impact their development and possibly their sexual development for the rest of their lives. These are really serious chemicals, and there needs to be a way to have accountability and have informed consent.
And so let's talk our people through, again, exactly what we want them to do, because, again, this is serious and we need to stop this. So, Dr. Muñoz, what do you want us to do right now after the show?
It would be great if you just first went on Twitter or X and retweeted some of the tweets from CHD or other people that have been sharing about this, because the more we can get this moving on X, the more attention we can draw to the legislators involved. It's great if you can tag members of the Appropriations Committee in both the Senate and the House, because they're the ones who are responsible for this decision right now of whether this stays in the bill or whether it moves out of the bill. And so we're really hoping that the appropriators will realize that a spending bill should not be used to give de facto immunity to an entire industry for a very dangerous set of chemicals.
And stop buying the products. It's not only killing you and your children, but actually, if you stop buying the products, that's got to have a massive impact as well, right?
Sure, but there's still a lot of people in the country that are using them. So, at this moment, we've got to just make our voices really loud, because this is the week that we want to make sure 453 is not in the Interior Appropriations Bill. It's very important that that message is communicated very loudly this week.
And I think the main thing about this is people just don't know. They just don't know what you're telling us now. So thank you for coming on. And they can follow you personally, can't they?
Yeah, I'll be doing a lot of updates on this situation on X and on Instagram. And there's also another situation brewing this week that we also really need to get attention on, which is that the Supreme Court is deciding whether or not to take up a case, Monsanto versus Darnell, which is another part of their strategy to get immunity, is to have the Supreme Court hear this case, and they're hoping for a ruling in favor of them. But this case is based on that retracted paper that we just looked at, that the safety claims that they're making about Roundup are in part from this Williams 2000 paper that was just retracted. So the Supreme Court, in my opinion, really shouldn't be even considering a case that's based on a fraudulent scientific paper like this.
Yeah, Dr. Muñoz, thank you so much for giving us this critical update. And do please come back and keep us informed and keep telling us, educating us on what it is that we have to do to stop this.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got to just make our voices really loud right now. So please share all this information. Make sure everyone knows that this is the week to talk about this, and that we've got to get the word out and the attention of the legislators and the appropriators.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Muñoz, for coming on this morning. We really appreciate it. All right, viewers. So now we're going to go to our measles panel, which we didn't fit in over the Christmas break, but this is my favorite because I think this is typical of Children's Health Defence breaking down mainstream media lies. And it was great journalism, and it was a massive team effort, and we got there in the end. So to our viewers, we'll see you tomorrow. We're back live every single day. So we'll see you tomorrow. Pray big, stand firm, never settle. Everyone. Okay, this is a very, very important panel. And the reason why I insisted that we did it... Hold it away. The reason why we insisted we did it is earlier this year, many of you who follow us on CHD TV will know that Children's Health Defence broke down the lies of the media. And here is now, we're about to show you an example of what happened. But first, I want you all to meet Peter Hildebrand. His daughter Daisy was the one they say died of measles, unvaccinated, died of measles. And we know categorically this did not happen. And he's very brave to be on the panel today. So please see his beautiful daughter. I think you have a picture of Daisy on the screen, and the tragic loss. I'm going to start with Tina, who was the amazing Mennonite community liaison between Children's Health Defence and them. And it's a huge honour to us at Children's Health Defence that they trusted us to come and uncover the truth. So I'm going to pass. Do you have a mic on?
It is truly an honor to have been asked and to be in your midst this Morning. Wow, what an amazing honor to have the opportunity to come and share our story. And like Polly said, I have been chosen to be the bridge between communities. My Comanche name that was given to me by the Comanche Nation is Pu'ai Posakani, meaning I am a bridge. So I am truly honored to be the bridge, not only in my community, but to the United States and the world.
So we're going to hear more about the Mennonite community because this will unravel, but you were inundated, were you not, with press as this measles story broke? And we're going to go to Dr. Ben Edwards in a minute.
Yeah. Our local health department came to me and said, we have one case that has been reported. And that was the first I had heard of the measles in my community. Now that, in the afterwards, I was told that we had had some cases in February, possibly as early as during the Christmas break. But the cases did not feel like the normal measles. Grandmas, great-grandmas said, this does not feel like measles. So it wasn't diagnosed until this one little girl went to the doctor and they diagnosed her with measles. So it was at that point when the media just bombarded. I mean, our small community has had things happen with the Mennonite community with immigration before, where the media was just inundating our community. But this was just so unexpected, and it felt like we were just again thrown at the world stage. And I had previously prayed that I was going to be able to be a spokesperson for immigration, but this was not the way that I had thought that I would get media to come and listen, come and attend, walk through the museum doors at the West Texas Living Heritage Museum. But it was truly an honor to be able to, again, be the help, be the voice, to having people understand who are the Mennonites, what do they believe, how did they get here, and for them to realize that we have always been very self-independent and also self-sustaining, doing more the natural way, and that's where I'm so grateful for Dr. Ben. Many of my community call him a dear friend and their physician. And so with this, it was no different. It was, their questions was like, why you must be the uneducated, unvaccinated. And that is not the case, because they did not make the choice to not vaccinate because they were not educated. These mamas, they are mama bears when it comes to their babies. And that is what we saw in our community.
We had one reporter that did not sneak into the funeral of the first girl Haley that died. And so that was media's work. So obviously, yes, people were very on edge who they could trust.
Yeah.
And that's when we got a call, or Brian Hooker got a call, Ben Edwards. But before we go into that story, and then on to Pierre Corey, who broke down the medical records with Dr. Suzanne, and Brian, you need to hear the timeline of this. We're going to go to Daisy's dad, because the reason why it hit the headlines was 2 unvaccinated girls die of measles. Again, we will break down how they did not die of measles. So I'm going to ask you, Peter, if you're okay, to talk to us about the beautiful girl that Daisy is, and I'm pretty sure you're seeing a picture of her up on the screen right now.
Well, so I'm going to tell y'all something, and don't start running. I'm not vaccinated. I'm not sick. And that picture right there, that was her last birthday. Yeah.
You got it, man.
I'm sorry. On Daisy, when she was born, I had to sit there and fight the doctors off. They wanted to forcefully vaccinate her for all the vaccines. I had to sit there and get into arguments with him. And ever since my daughter has passed away, my wife is pregnant again, we're not ever, if I can help it, go back to the hospital ever again. And you know, if all this political bias crap that's going on in the world nowadays, if anybody is going to try to force my kids to get the vaccines, they got something else coming, because I live in Texas. I'm sorry. You know, but on the other hand, I guess Polly was telling me earlier that she wanted me to speak on what type of girl Daisy was. She was very loving. She was, for example, if we would give her a candy or two, she would always make sure that her little brother had the same amount as her. She was very sweet, always playing around. You know, it just, her immune system dropped so much when we were in the hospital, and the crazy thing is, if I would go outside the room, try to get some fresh air, Dr. Tiva, he would sit there and talk to my wife about measles this, measles that. As soon as I come into the room, he was quiet about it. Why couldn't he talk to me about it? You know, just whenever I wasn't around, he would sit there and be political about it. I don't understand why we got to live in the world we live in.
We're going to come back and talk more about Daisy in a minute. I'm just going to take this over to Ben, because you were on the ground treating the people with measles, fighting off the press, and also calling Brian Hooker. You both were liaising, and that's where Children's Health Defense came in. So talk to us about what you were seeing on the ground.
Well, initially, 'cause my clinic is in Lubbock, which is about 90 miles north of Gaines County. And we had a few cases coming in over the week prior, and we'd treat them. I'm more of a holistic integrative approach, so we treated these few cases. We saw no problem. And the Washington Post had reached out to the office and wanted to come do an interview. And that's back when I thought maybe they would be open to the truth. But the reason I called Brian, I'd had Brian on my podcast and Dr. Wakefield before, and of course I knew the movie Vaxxed and William Thompson, the whistleblower, the whole thing. But what I called to ask was what happened to where that information went to Congressman Burton, was my memory way back in the day. And I wanted to know where that was. And now that, you know, the new administration, maybe that information was going to be back in Congress. And so I called Brian just to find out what happened to that case in Congress. That was the initial reach out. And then quickly thereafter, it ramped up. Acting CDC Director Menares called to ask what I was seeing, how it was going, what treatments were effective. So that was kind of how it started.
Well, part of the story was that Dr. Edwards was more than willing and had the expertise to actually treat the measles and treat the bacterial pneumonia that can happen after the measles, and treat the problems that the patients were actually having. You know, Dr. Edwards took the Hippocratic Oath seriously, and he takes medicine seriously, and there was no uttering of, you know, well, you're on your own, you didn't get the MMR vaccine. There was nothing like that. And, you know, I've known Dr. Edwards for about 2 years. He straight away, especially after the first girl died, Kaylee, went down to Lubbock, Texas, opened up a free clinic, free measles clinic, was able to treat these girls and boys with for their lung issues with inhaled steroids, also looking for the possibility for bacterial pneumonia, so azithromycin, other types of antibiotics, and was on the front lines. Not only was he on the front lines, but he also was concerned about all of the cases and arranged to airlift out of his own expense $200,000 worth of vitamin A and vitamin C, high-dose vitamin A and C, from Arizona, from a supplier in Arizona, and we actually have pictures of the airplane packed to the gills with vitamin A and vitamin C. You know, angels from on high were delivering that. But I do want to, you know, one of the things that when I talked to Tina Siemens was that this was different. There were things that were different about the measles. The fact that they could never find patient zero, they could never find the patient they came in. The fact that kids were getting sick with multiple diseases, not just the measles. And I want to talk to Dr. Wakefield. The measles virus, can that have a propensity to mutate? Does that mutate? And, you know, what would be the tentative explanations why this was so different?
Yes, it does, absolutely. Measles is an RNA virus. It's highly versatile in as much that it will mutate. Sorry about the feedback. It'll mutate very rapidly. One of the problems with an imperfect vaccine, which measles vaccine certainly is that it will encourage it'll put in an evolutionary selection pressure on the virus to mutate. In other words, what will happen is the vaccine may be effective against 95% of the strains in that vaccine, but the 5% to which it's ineffective will then become the dominant species. And if that's a really nasty virus, then you've made it a lot worse. Now, we've seen this with COVID. We all know about it now. You give a COVID shot, and it's imperfect, and it leads to a selection pressure on the COVID virus that evolves into more or different strains of the COVID vaccine. For Pfizer, that's wonderful, because it will require a new shot, and a new shot, and a new shot. So that's what happens with imperfect vaccines, just as we saw with bacteria and antibiotics, imperfect antibiotics. We now live in the era of what the public health authorities call the post-antibiotic apocalypse, because we have multi-resistant pathogenic strains of bacteria that have evolved because of antibiotics. That's not to say that antibiotics weren't a miracle, it's just that nature will not be contained. Life will find a way. And that's what it does, and that's what it's geared up to do, and that's what it's done with vaccines, so that, and finally, that we now have what are called declayed variants of the virus, the measles virus, that have emerged in highly vaccinated populations that are not susceptible to the neutralizing antibodies produced by the vaccine. That is a real problem.
Yeah, really quick, I want to go back to Dr. Ben. You were appropriately treating the condition. You were appropriately assessing symptoms. What was the response of the other individuals, the Texas DSHS officials and the CDC on the ground to the measles outbreak in West Texas?
The focus was on testing and vaccination. And, you know, I was asked to come down by Tina to assess the siblings of the first little girl, Kaylee, that passed away, because the parents were fearful that the siblings who had the measles too would maybe go have the same fate. So I went down to Gaines County and assessed those kids. It was actually at the church, at the viewing the day before the funeral, and brought them some cod liver oil, which has the vitamin A and vitamin D, brought them some vitamin C. And they had a respiratory, significant cough, had the rash, fever, and then a lot of the families bringing the kids in to visit at the viewing. I just saw family after family after family with lots of children with coughing and sick. And as I assessed the siblings and was getting ready to go, the father asked me if I could go assess his nephews, I believe it was, twin baby boys, 4 months old, had the measles, very sick at home, had actually been to the local emergency room, had been told to stay outside for 45 minutes, and the one baby was really sick. Well, I met her at her house, and when I assessed that baby, there was a significant respiratory component, and it reminded me of the adults I'd treated with COVID. The lungs had a certain sound and just a look to it, and that's what struck me, is this baby's acting like the adults did. The respiratory component, which I was surprised, because measles historically, I'd not seen measles before this, but what I read in the books, I wasn't expecting that. I was able to get some budesonide that evening, and that baby responded beautifully to that. And then subsequently, there were a whole lot more babies the next day that I assessed. And so very quickly, I had a personal firsthand knowledge that this budesonide was really helping the respiratory component. I was seeing that baby, that 4-month-old, 24 hours later, looked like a different kid. I couldn't believe it. And so I thought this was a key piece of information that the local health authorities would want to know. And so I tried to express that the very local health authority was out of the country and unreachable for a month. And so went up the chain of command to the state, and that physician on the phone told me, when I told him, hey, I need some help. This community's fearful to go to the hospital and fearful to seek out medical care in general. But I think they would go to other clinics and hospitals. If you put a bulletin out officially saying, hey, budesonide's helpful in this situation, the clinical evidence in the first few cases. And his answer to me was, no, we can't do that. And I said, well, why not? And he said, the only thing we can recommend is vaccination. And I said, well, that's not a treatment, that's a preventative. And these are sick kids, 103, 104, 105 fever. They're actively sick. It's contraindicated to give the vaccine. And again, it's not a treatment. And he just said, well, the folks above me in the chain of command would not go for that. So I got pretty disgruntled with him and realized that that's the way it was going to be. It was going to be screen and vaccinate only, and there's no treatment. I did express to some of the federal officials similar that, hey, this is what I'm seeing with cod. And cod liver oil has a long history, multiple published studies. I have to give a shout out to Weston A. Price and the Weston A. Price Foundation. Lots of data going back to the mid-1800s. There's a reduction in mortality and tuberculosis, a 3-fold survivability. But anyways, lots of data on vitamin A. And so there was some reception on the phone with some of the federal officials, but boots on the ground, not so much. So that was kind of the response.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. Right, let's summarise it up where we are right now. So we've got headlines all around the country saying 2 girls from Gaines County, unvaccinated, had died of measles. Meanwhile, Dr. Ben Edwards and Brian Hooker are getting the medical records. Now, this is really important because the press seem to think we're lying about this. Both parents, correct, gave us Children's Health Defence under the command of Brian Hooker the authority to go through the medical records of their girls. Peter, yes.
Yes.
And you can speak on behalf of the other Peter. So let's just get that clear, because that's our favourite line, that we're lying. So we got the medical records. Brian Hooker's science team then got Dr. Pierre Corey and Dr. Susan Humphreys. Do you agree? You can't get more better qualified than those. To go through the records. So now we're going to hand over to Dr. Corey to tell us what they found in the records. And we've got, obviously, Daisy's parents and family here in the audience.
Yeah, so first I just want to thank CHD for doing what they did, and Tina, and just the work and supporting the parents. And, like Polly said, getting at the truth, because they turn these cases into just mass propaganda and lies. I've been doing medical record reviews probably for 10 plus years. I've actually been a malpractice reviewer, some pretty high profile cases. And, so I'm a pulmonary and critical care physician, and these were both pulmonary and critical care cases. And so with Daisy, and I'll just sort of give the punchline and then we'll go through what happened. But, in reviewing lots of cases, right, you need to look for kind of 2 things. There needs to be a deviation from the standard of care, and that particular deviation needs to cause harm. And in doing many case reviews, it's oftentimes hard. You can actually find lots of errors and missed opportunities to have done better, but it's not always easy to tie the exact omission or commission to the actual harm, because especially when you get a complicated ICU case. But that wasn't the situation in either of these cases. It was so clear and almost so brazen, the deficit in care. I have to tell you, it was shocking and beyond tragic, and it's really sad. You know, I don't know, Ben could probably comment on this more, but what I was seeing, the level of doctoring I was seeing was, I'd never seen such sort of incompetent, amateurish inability to critically think, and just this, and I think there was some bias that guided their actions, because they seemed unwilling or uncaring to change from the diagnosis. But in Daisy's case, she'd had quite a prolonged sort of illness month. She'd had a tonsillitis early in the month, then she had a strep throat, and then somewhere in the course she developed measles. And basically, she had a secondary bacterial pneumonia, which is quite common with any virus. This is not unique to measles. My own daughter, when she was 14, had the flu, and she got a bacterial pneumonia afterwards. We started an antibiotic. Within a day or two, she was totally fine. So this is like a routine, common thing to look for, easy to treat. These are kids in a community where the antibiotics, standard antibiotics, should be quickly effective at treating a pneumonia, but that's not what happened. She contracted pneumonia, was getting worse. Her parents rightly brought her to the hospital, and just right there at the get-go was the first standard deviation, which is they should have sent a sputum culture. When you have someone hospitalized, actually the second hospital is when they should have. In the first one, they treated her, and she actually responded. The choice of antibiotics was bizarre, and it's actually more, it was much more harmful in the second case of Kaylee Fair. But in Daisy's case, she actually responded. But boy, were they quick to get her out of the hospital, right? Because of measles. And she was only there, I think, overnight. They already were sending her home. And there was a note to give her an oral antibiotic. I could find no record that she got one, which is just stunning to me that someone would go home without an antibiotic, if I'm getting that correctly from my memory. But that's actually not what really caused the harm. She was home for a very short time, for 2 days, and started to get worse. So she represented to, I don't know if it was the same or a different hospital. The cases are a little bit mixed up, but it doesn't matter. She went back to the hospital, and she was admitted to an ICU because her pneumonia was significantly worse. She was hypoxic. She needed oxygen. And what happened there is both cases, they chose a combination of antibiotics. So typically when you get someone with a pneumonia, you don't know what organism it is, so you have to do what's called empiric treatment. And the microbiology of organisms coming out of a community has been very well defined. We know what the pair of antibiotics you do to make sure that you're getting a broad range of possible organisms. And they chose just the most bizarre combination I've ever seen. They used something called the cephalosporin, which is really common, great, good antibiotic, but they paired it with something called vancomycin, which is literally used for multi-drug resistant, Staph aureus or MRSA. And that's only something that you get in a hospital. It doesn't cover the broader range of hospital organisms, and it's certainly not necessary in a community. But here's the case. With Daisy, she'd just been in an ICU. And in my specialty, anyone who comes out of a hospital or an ICU who presents with a pneumonia, top of your list is a hospital-acquired pneumonia. She came in with a community-acquired to that ICU, and now she's representing. So either it was an inadequately treated community-acquired pneumonia or it's a hospital one, but you have to do it. They did not do a sputum culture, which is like medicine 101. Someone who's just been discharged from an ICU represents, you got to find out what the bug is. They didn't. And then this is where possibly the bias comes in, but the record reeked of something called, we call anchoring or tunnel vision, which is a physician will latch onto a diagnosis, become pretty convinced of it, and somehow not develop the intellectual flexibility to question whether the diagnosis is right and reassess whether it's correct. I have two kind of principles that I've always taught. I taught residents, fellow students for many years, and especially in the ICU, there was two guides that guided every one of my actions. If what you're doing is working, keep doing what you're doing. If what you're doing is not working, you got to change what you're doing. And I saw that violated throughout her entire case, and it was really sad to see, because I'm reading a record of a child deteriorating in ever worsening state of respiratory failure, and I'm watching these notes, and it was just measles, complications of measles, complications of measles, complications of measles. She was starting to have a rising white count. You could see there was other stuff going on. Actually, measles pneumonia, had those doctors tried to read about it, typically has a normal white blood cell count and or a low one. And hers started rising, still didn't do a culture, and I think she was there for 8 days. Out of the 8 days, she'd only gotten 4 days of antibiotics. Someone had started them, and then they quickly stopped the antibiotics, then put her on high-dose corticosteroids, which, by the way, in an infection, corticosteroids are actually not harmful. They're actually beneficial in terms of outcomes in pneumonia as long as they're paired with an antibacterial. And in this case, they bombed her with high-dose steroids without any antibacterial support in case she had one, and then you saw this rapid decline. And it was only until day 7 she died on the 8th day, that the word hospital-acquired pneumonia creeped into the chart. So 7 days later of a deteriorating young child, and they, in terms of liability, in terms of litigation, I wouldn't say that they made a mistake, but they ended up sending a sputum culture. And unfortunately, Daisy died on day 8, and a few hours after Daisy died, the culture came back. And the culture showed a wickedly, broadly resistant bacteria. It was clearly a hospital-acquired pneumonia. She'd either contracted in her first stay or early in her second. There was numerous other signs that she was developing a severe pneumonia. And, they did start antibiotics prior to death, but here's another kind of tragic thing with this case is that the antibiotics they chose, although they were appropriately broad, didn't follow adult hospital-acquired pneumonia guidelines. As I looked into the case, I was shocked because I'm not a pediatrician, but I discovered that pediatrics does not have a hospital-acquired pneumonia guideline. And so they were just kind of shooting from the hip. There's no real professional society guidance around that. And the antibiotic they chose, it was resistant to. Had they followed the guidelines, which they would have used something called imipenem, she would have responded because the bacteria was sensitive to that. So that it was just a series of errors and uncritical thinking, lack of flexibility, lack of reassessment. It was just this anchoring on measles, measles, measles. And like I said in the example of my daughter, this could have been easily treated with the appropriate antibiotic regimen.
So just to summarize that up, did Daisy die from the measles?
Absolutely not. The measles were clearing up. There's no evidence that this was a measles pneumonia. That's distinctly rare. It was clear that she died from catastrophic multi-organ failure from a horrific hospital organism that was broadly resistant. I mean, this was a tragic case, but I got to tell you, we see hospital-acquired organisms all the time, and we treat them. We treat aggressively and broadly, and it's not something you should die of.
And the other girl, Kaylee?
And Kaylee, hers was probably, I don't even know if I can compare the two, but they were similar in terms of absolute incompetence. Kaylee came in with standard garden variety secondary community acquired pneumonia from measles, okay? Like I said with my daughter, super simple, right? I think with my daughter, we treated her, this is years ago, with azithromycin. So azithromycin is what's called a macrolide. The reason why it's part of every standard community-acquired pneumonia regimen is because there is a bug called mycoplasma. And mycoplasma only responds to a macrolide, which is azithromycin, because it doesn't have a cell wall. Most of the other antibiotics their killing mechanism is through disrupting the cell wall. So with mycoplasma, you need to use a different kind of pharmacological mechanism. So I will tell you the combination, we have like a shorthand in medicine and pulmonary medicine. It's like cephenazithro, cephenazithro, cephenazithro. It's like almost like a little phrase. And what does that mean? It's ceftriaxone and azithromycin, right? So you have a cephalosporin, which covers a lot of the gram positives that you'll see and even some gram negatives. And then you have to get the azithro to target that mycoplasma. So here's the thing. Again, as in Daisy's case, they use ceftriaxone and vancomycin, again, which is only good for severely resistant hospital-acquired pneumonia. She came from the community. There's no reason to use that combination, and I was shocked. And I just want to bring in one more point is, since then, CHD wrote a very detailed letter of complaint to the medical board, which I think it's not only to go after doctors, it's about education. Anytime you have a bad case or a bad outcome, you review it to learn from it. What did we do wrong? What could we do better? And I was trying to, when I did CHD TV and we were reviewing this case and I was giving my expert opinion, I was hoping and praying that those people in Texas in that region were understanding that they were treating antibiotics in a bizarre and totally inappropriate way. And then with Kaylee, same thing. She comes in getting worse. It's like watching a slow-moving car crash as I'm reviewing this chart. And again, just like I think the day or 36 hours before death, someone finally thinks, hey, maybe we should test for mycoplasma. By the way, it's an easy test to do. They never did it. And they send it from the records, 11 p.m. at night. It comes back positive. The doctor orders azithromycin, and from the record, she doesn't get it until 9 a.m. the next morning, which is inexcusable in an ICU patient. We have standards of between 30 minutes and at most 2 hours from the ordering of an antibiotic to a critically ill patient. That's not what happened there, and a day later she died of catastrophic multi-organ failure, largely led by complete lung failure. They couldn't oxygenate her anymore from a mycoplasma pneumonia, commonest pneumonia that you'll see. Macrolides, it's so easy to treat. You give someone a Zithro, maybe even 1 or 2 doses, they will turn right around. And I had to watch this poor young girl deteriorate and die from the lack of a simple antibiotic.
That's incredible, the level of incompetence, and it was very, very difficult to go through the medical records. The thing that was more difficult was being a parent in the hospital and feeling helpless and being treated as you were hapless in your, now Daisy was in and out of the hospital 3 times in 2 different facilities. Tell us what it was like as a parent as you were trying to get the best care for Daisy.
Scary, frustrating. I mean, you go to work one day and you're halfway through the day, you get a phone call, you gotta go back home and take your daughter to the hospital again because nothing's helping. You know, you miss work, you don't know what way to turn, you're scared. It's absolutely terrible. I don't wish that on my worst enemy.
You said that at one point your daughter Daisy was diagnosed with thrush. What was their reasoning? And what did they say regarding the thrush, the white in her mouth?
I don't even remember if they ever got any results from the test that they ran.
Right.
But they did say, according to the white stuff in the back of her throat, it was thrush. And you know, in the Seminole Hospital, she got diagnosed with mono. Mm-hmm. And she always had real bad problems with swollen tonsils. So we're trying to push the doctors to get those taken out because they were always bothering her, but they wouldn't listen to us. You know, first you got to come in 4 or 5 times for the same reason until we can, you know, send you to a specialist. Like that's crap, if you ask me. You already know what's bothering your child. Of course, it's your child. You already know what's bothering her, and you got to go to the hospital 4 or 5 different times for the same reason. It's stupid.
Absolutely. And what they said about the thrush when it was diagnosed, I think this was at Covenant Children's Hospital, was that, it must be due to poor hygiene.
Yes.
not the fact that she was immunocompromised and she had an overgrowth of yeast because of immunocompromise. Now, part of this is this entire episode was the underlayment of the fact that these individuals, Daisy, Kaylee, and a lot of individuals in the Mennonite community were unvaccinated with the MMR. Let's talk about the MMR, Dr. Wakefield. I hear he knows something about the MMR, but from a standpoint of what could happen regarding the MMR vaccine and what did happen, when Polly and I were there were no less than 9 vaccine injuries in this small community in West Texas, all due to the MMR vaccine. Can you comment further on that?
Yes, MMR, it's interesting. I asked years ago the chief medical officer from the United Kingdom, at the time Dr. David Salisbury, actually was second in command. I said, when you put the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines together, live viral vaccines, what comparison did you do between the single shot and the hazards of the single shot versus the triple? Because I had done an extensive review of the pre-licensing literature and found absolutely no systematic comparison. The assumption had been 1 and 1 and 1 equals 3. And I'll come to that in a minute. But he said, and his answer to this was, we had no reason to assume that giving the 3 viruses at the same time would be any different than giving the single measles shot. You are not entitled to make assumptions about the safety of anything if you intend to give it to a healthy pediatric population, every child in the world effectively. There is no room for assumption. And the certainties of today are the problems of tomorrow. And that's what happened. They assumed that it would be safe. We now know, because of a recent ruling from ACIP, that when you put 4 together, 4 live viruses, it causes an excess of adverse reactions, and they've reversed that. But they had no reason to assume at the time that measles, mumps, and rubella were a problem. Well, they in fact were, because what they did is they looked at the efficacy, the ability to generate antibodies, and they found that that was altered in the triple vaccine compared to the single. But they still continued to assume that it had no impact on safety whatsoever. So we're dealing with an entirely unknown quantity. And for the media who are here, who reported on this case and said that it was measles, what will you do now? The New York Times, Bloomberg, the Washington Post, who are in this room, what will you do having heard the facts? Will you take that information and change your story? Will you tell the truth? Will you tell an alternative version? I doubt it very, very much. And this man here, Pierre Corey, he has condemned the medical practice there. He stands to be sued for defamation. Let's see if he is or not. Because if he's not, you can be damn sure that he's right. So, will you change your story? No, and you wonder why I won't interview with you. There we go.
Okay, all right, we've got 10 minutes left, and I want to hear from every single person here on the panel. But I just want to say to all of you here, this is why we're so passionate about breaking down the real truth and what's going on in the media. The media have a lot to answer for. I can't imagine how many women, petrified hearing that 2 girls had died, unvaccinated, ran out and got the MMR for their child. So they have a lot to answer for. We, the people, we need to become the citizen journalists. You need to report to us the minute you see the truth of what's happening, and we will get that out. We have to become the media. We have to tell people like Senator Blumenthal, or whatever his name is, at the Senate hearings, who keeps wheeling out that piece of paper saying 3 unvaccinated deaths in Texas, We have to tell him no. The other person apparently died of measles. No, I don't think exists. We can't find anything on him, do we?
They refused medical treatment and died at home, and they were diagnosed with measles during their autopsy using RT-PCR.
And nobody knows who he is anyway. No one. He's not related to anyone.
Hobbs, New Mexico Public Health Department would not release information.
So he needs to be told, not Blumenthal. And so we need to become, as I said, the citizens' journalists. So I want to hear from everybody here. What have we learnt from the tragic deaths of beautiful Daisy and Kaylee? So from each of you, I want to hear that. Starting maybe with you, Andy. We'll go the other way.
We've learnt that there is no depth to which the system will stoop to support its own case. In the absence of good science, and what we're faced with is propaganda, and that's why this kind of meeting is so essential. The courage of the parents to be counted, the courage of my colleagues here to stand up and be counted, extremely important. When I first got involved in this 30 years ago, there were perhaps 5 people, a handful of people around the world who were prepared to discuss the thorny issue of vaccine safety. It's now, because of COVID, because of movies, because of everything else, because of you, because of these doctors, it's more than half the adult population of the world. And so you have to see this in an historical perspective. People who come to this more recently, certainly through COVID, say, how can we ever win this? Our voices are not being heard. Oh, yes, they are. More than half the adult population of the world are now questioning public health policy. And do you know what? Public health, who denounces us and has so much concern for what happens if this mythology takes hold. What happens is that they have created this situation. This is entirely of their own making. And because they have given so many vaccines in so short a time, it is scientifically impossible to dissect out which ones or which element of the vaccines are actually causing the problem. They have blighted the entire vaccine program. When people say no more, it will be no more across the board. Once again, they only have themselves to blame.
Thank you, Andy. And Dr. Ben, I just want to say one more thing before we get to you, and then Pierre. We've got a problem in that hospitals are now a dangerous place to take your children.
I agree.
Oh, I said hospitals are now a dangerous place to take your children, or indeed yourselves. We saw the hospital COVID protocols killed masses, and now we're seeing the measles protocol in hospital. We're afraid to take our children to hospital.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point for everyone, and probably everyone here already recognizes this. We need to be our own advocates. We need to be educated. We need to walk in the truth. It appears to me the entire American pediatric field is underpinned by fear. And when you bring fear into the equation, when you're making a decision, that clouds judgment. And so the truth can set you free from fear. The body's designed to heal itself. The body's designed to defend itself. And if we steward that terrain, it will do that. So that's my take-home message for my patients. It's what I brought to the Mennonite community is don't walk in fear. You can overcome this. But you need knowledge, you need some education, and we all do. And we need to steward this amazing design. And it'll do what it's designed to do. So.
Exactly as a doctor should be. Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Pierre.
Yeah, I mean, the word doctor means a teacher. And, we call it the practice of medicine because we can't be perfect. Sometimes the information is incomplete or even unknowable, and situations are moving fast. But we have learned a few things. And when I see basic standards practices not being followed, really my wish is, after getting over the sadness of watching these 2 cases, was that Department of Health in Texas has to do an intervention. Or the CMO of the hospital, after learning how this child died, needs to just do a grand round. A grand rounds is like a weekly conference where all the doctors go to. They have to correct what's happening. It was just atrocious care, lack of awareness of it. And so I think there is an educational reform. And then I have another thought. And this is actually was re-triggered by a conversation I had with Dr. Kevin Stillwagon, chiropractor, who's here, and he's deeply studied on vaccines. But we were talking yesterday, and he was telling about data from the aviation industry, like the number of reports and near misses and events that are happening in the cockpit have greatly increased since 2021. You guys know about the data on vaccidents, what we call the car crashes, right? So that's all. And I really feel, and I've been writing in my blog on Substack about what I think is increasing cognitive impairment amongst our medical professionals. They're some of the most highly vaccinated, first vaccinated, aggressively vaccinated, and we know how much cognitive function is being damaged by these vaccines. And so I really worry about it. You know, I see patients all day long, and many of them straddle that system between seeing me in private practice, like alternative or complementary care, and the stories that I hear from them are shocking. And I've heard of just the most egregious errors being made, and I really worry about us all. And you know, Polly brought it up. The couple of posts I've been writing about growing nosocomophobia. You know what nosocomophobia is? It's a fear of hospitals. And also iatrogenophobia, which is a fear of doctors. And many of us have already cited that JAMA article from 24, which showed that trust in hospital and doctors fell from 72% in 2019 to 2024, it was 40%. Less than half the country still trust their hospital and doctors. And like Dr. Wakefield was pointing out, they've created this. I demand and ask for some humility, some recognition that they went astray, they went wrong, and try to go back to like good science, putting the welfare of the community, instead of the welfare of the pharmaceutical industry as their primary purpose. And that's all I got to say.
Tina.
Well, history tells us if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. And so learning from our mistakes, admitting our mistakes, that is when new growth can happen and new education can be accepted. So my prayer is that we can learn from what my community went through. And I'm so grateful for CHD that they are our eyes and ears. They are going to help bring this to pass. And so we keep fighting. If we fall once, we get up and we do it again. And so I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to be here in your midst and to make the truth stand out, because the truth, like Dr. Ben says, will set us free. Amen.
Well, so we all know what happened to Charlie Kirk. I'm about to say something. If there's a liberal in here, please don't be mad at me. But thank God for Donald Trump, and thank God for RFK Jr. for trying to make some changes. And thank God for CHD for trying to make some changes himself.
Just really quickly, there were so many stories, there were so many testimonies, the resilience of the Mennonite community and the community aspect of these individuals coming together were absolutely wonderful. The other thing is that when you see something wrong, you run towards your Goliaths. You run towards the things that are wrong. When you know the truth, you have been given a gift. When I called Polly and said, let's go to Seminole, Texas, she's like, well, let me pack my bags. We'll be right there. And going into the epicenter, we found out the story, the real story, and we found out that, yes, when you use your voice, when you get involved, when you know the truth, you will make a difference.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So I just want to say to you, Peter, and please pass on to Kaylee's parents as well, we will never forget Daisy. We will never forget Kylie. This audience, the people watching online, we know the truth of what happened. And in their name, we fight on to make sure this never happens to any other children. All the vaccines, killing and maiming. We will keep at Children's Health Defence fighting with everything we've got. So this team here, sitting on this panel now, we're responsible for uncovering the truth. Andy's been uncovering the truth for years. So I want to thank this team. I want to thank you all for listening and supporting us at Children's Health Defence. Thank you.
Thank you.
To me, honest medicine is built on trust. It's built on a relationship of integrity.
Honest medicine is working with your patients together for their health.
Honest means it's driven by an honest desire to help the patient achieve better health.
There is no bias involved because there's no ulterior motive other than that patient's health.
A future that includes transparency, a future that includes education, and more importantly, a future that includes science, so that everything that we do in medicine is backed by science.
The only way you can move forward from where we were is restoring trust. And trust starts with me and with my patient building the relationship together.
Let's build a healthier, more honest future together. Visit imahealth.org.
How difficult it is to follow with a lecture after what we just heard. So part of what I'm going to do today is give you a light at the end of the tunnel. I want to thank Mary Holland and the rest of the people at CHD for the cordial invitation. And I want to talk to you about something that is extremely important, that is what I call the Great Medical Awakening. If you asked me 6-7 years ago if I was going to be here in front of you today, I would say, oh, hell no. There are a bunch of conspiracy theory people there and stuff like that. I don't trust any of them. But today, I want to tell you my journey through capture science to independent medicine. It's something that defined how many of us changed. We are at a moral crossroads. We are at a situation where compliance is overshadowed of compassion. And we, at the time that we were confronted with COVID, we saw how institutions were being captured. The science was captured. You would read a paper that was written by 26 individuals working for Pfizer, and that would be published without anybody even talking about a conflict of interest. You saw all these selective publications, and then you were told, trust the science. No, they were not telling you trust the science. They were telling you, obey the narrative. That's what they were trying to tell you. And what that did, at the end of the day, it cost millions and millions of lives. Why? Because patients started to receive treatments based on protocols, and these were institutional protocols. These doctors were fearing for their, I'm not going to say for their lives, but for their livelihood, for their only ways to make money. And who pays the price? Patients. But at some point in time, some of my colleagues and I, we have to say enough is enough. We had that situation where we said, shall we comply or shall we listen to our conscience? Which one is best? And that's when the big awakening starts. You remember Dr. Paul Marik and many of my colleagues that began to speak publicly. And you should know that one thing that is very common is that truth will spread much faster than fear. So you started to hear all these people that were saying, hey, these people are into something. There is truth behind this. And that courage that my colleagues were having became contagious. A lot of people started to follow us. And we had this conscious revolution. Why? Because we reactivated that moral compass. We didn't have to follow what they told us to follow. and we started to heal, and the truth started to come. Of course, frontline physicians worldwide had all sorts of march. They went to places. They shared their sacrifice. Many of them lost their licenses, but they still, and many of them continue to be the voice for their patients. I mean, that light at the end of a tunnel, that's still there. And that's where we were born, the IMA. How many of you know what the IMA is? Lift up your hand. I just want to get an idea. Now, how many of you know what the FLCCC is? Well, guess what? We're the same thing. So the FLCCC was created by 5 of us, 5 friends, just talking in the middle of the night, having Zooms at 3 o'clock in the morning, figuring out how do we save people. And it evolved to something that we could not even believe. Eventually, we rebranded into the Independent Medical Alliance, and today we have more than 12,000 physicians in this alliance. We have scientists, we have researchers. We have one mission in mind, and that's to restore the integrity of medicine, to do what we call honest medicine. How do you do that? Well, by having transparency, but the most important part, by not forgetting humanity, something that many have forgotten. And why did they forget that? Because this is a nasty, vicious circle. Academia is owned by the industry. The industry owns the policymakers. The policymakers own the media. So at the end of the day, everything is a revolving door. And it is just making money, making money, making money. And this is what made the worst thing during COVID. What happened? You have profit over patients. So forget about the patient, let's think about how we make money. We had record pharma profits during the pandemic. But at the same time that the profits were going up, trust in medicine was going down. I mean, you just heard the term of nosophobia. I mean, patients didn't want to go to the hospital. My patient says, I'm not going to a hospital. I'm going to die if I go to the hospital. That trust went away. And that's one thing that IMA is trying to bring back, trying to help people trust medicine again. But the problem is you can't, because there are a lot of misaligned incentives, like I would call them. We were censored. I was the #1 prisoner on Facebook jail. I mean, anytime I would put something on ivermectin, I would get in trouble. Misinformation was used as a weapon, to the point I went in front of the Texas Medical Board twice. It's fascinating. You go there and they tell you, why are you using ivermectin? And you look at them with this nice little face, and you say, because it works. And they says, what do you mean it works? Hey, look at my mortality rate in my hospital, 4%. I have the lowest mortality rate in the country. And you compare that to the rest of the US, where they have anywhere between 25 and 40, and you are telling me that I need this gigantic randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled study. It's like, no, I don't need to do that. It's unethical to do that. But yet, misinformation was being used against us. I was lucky that the board actually saw the light and they let me loose, thank God, so I can continue to practice medicine. But truth really became contraband. I mean, you guys have no idea. We would have patients that we would put ivermectin, or they tell me that their family members would put ivermectin in their Twinkies that were being snuggled into their hospitals so they would take it. I mean, there are some stories that I can tell you that you would love. But this had a huge psychological toll on my colleagues. A lot of doctors had this, what I call moral injury, burnout, isolation. Several of them killed themselves. But yet some decided to have some courage. Why? Because we know that truth heals, we know that fear kills, but integrity saves lives. So what does the Independent Medical Alliance has come up with? Well, it has come up with a variety of pillars as to what we need to do. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that we understand that we have an epidemic of chronic illness that shouldn't be here. But instead of you having to go to your doctor, and I'm sure that all of you hear, oh, that patient has hypertension. Well, let's take him to the doctor, he gets a pill. If that pill doesn't do the trick, he gets 2 pills or 3 pills. But who talks to the patient as to ways to avoid getting that? How can we do that? We need a body that will be able to do that. And I know that, CHD does a lot of that, but there are many doctors that just don't get it. So if the doctor doesn't get it, who else can you help? You help the patient. And how do you help a patient? By empowering them, by educating the patients. If you educate patients, you do a good job. And that's what the IMA started to do from the time we used to be the FLCC. We created guides, we created resources, not just on COVID, but on just think about everything. We actually told people, hey, normality is not being sick. How many of you have been to Victoria's Secrets recently? You don't want to lift up your hand, But when you go to Victoria's Secrets, what do you see? You see these models that are huge. I'm serious, because they are trying to tell us that obesity is normal. No, obesity is not normal. But instead of telling you what you should eat, how you should eat, you should exercise, you should move, we know that movement is medicine. Instead, we're not doing it. So that's something that we're trying to change. We're trying to convince people that private practice is good. Instead of being owned by a big institution like Methodist Hospital or one of these big hospitals around, the small private practices where you have that doctor-patient relationship, the direct primary care works. Small clinics have big impacts, much bigger than these gigantic institutions that have these forceful protocols that you must follow. I've had a patient that came to my office the other day, had 8 times COVID over a period of a year. He went to the hospital 8 times, and at the hospital, they gave him 8 times remdesivir. Not my hospital, okay, let's just be clear. I mean, it's like the definition of insanity. I mean, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We need to change how we do things. A lot of people are now using artificial intelligence. And, I'm a big proponent of the use of artificial intelligence, but that doesn't replace my judgment. It helps me. AI is here to assist humanity, not to control it. And whoever is putting the data into the AI is the one that is deciding what's going to be done and what's not going to be done. What are we doing as an organization to try to give you that light at the end of a tunnel? Well, we're trying to leave some legacy. What kind of legacy? Everything that we can possibly do on different disease entities. For example, when we started with COVID and we came up with our eye care protocol, when we have patients with vaccine-related injuries, and we have our eye recover protocol. And we started to have that readily available to the public so that people can access them without any problem. Because make no mistake, there will be another pandemic. There is no question about it. How we approach it is what's going to make a difference. We know that the human being is the only animal that makes the same mistake twice. We are going to make the same mistake again, and they're going to try to shut us down, and they're going to try to put us down in stay at home and do your 6-foot nonsense and all that stuff. We have to document and keep this information available without them censoring us. I mean, we went to the point that we actually came up with our own servers that they could not even hack or do things like that, so that the data would be there available for people. Because you have no idea how many times they censored everything we did. Many of the doctors that work with us, they refuse to abandon patients, even at the expense of almost losing their license. Many of you know Dr. Mary Bowden. She's one of our senior fellows. Mary, amazing woman. I mean, absolutely amazing woman, and she's out there fighting every single day. And she's fighting not for money, she's fighting for all of us. Courage became really the best clinical excellence that we have. In addition to doing all these educational things, we became very friends with many organizations, including CHD, and we realized that this awakening that we were having as healthcare providers also happened in other areas, in law, even in the news. People were opening their eyes and says, hey, this is not right what we're doing. One of the things that we did at the Independent Medical Alliance is we created our own journal, the Journal of Independent Medicine, a journal that is double-blinded for the peer review, so there is no hanky-panky. It doesn't get a cent from the pharmaceutical companies, so nobody can tell us what we can and what we cannot publish. If it's scientifically sound, it will be published, and they're not going to be able to take that away from us, which is one important thing that we're doing. Lastly, what the future stands for is what are we going to do to prevent this from happening? Well, that starts in medical school. We have to reform, or actually I put here, reborn the medical education. We need to teach our students ethics first. Protocols go second. Ethics is the most important thing. You know that the first, do no harm? Well, do no harm means a lot, but we keep on getting that forgotten because we're told that we have to follow a protocol. The next generation must learn courage. We have to restore that patient-doctor relationship no matter what. We cannot let medicine be taken away by big pharma or anybody else. We have to keep on seeing images like this. This is an image of me with one of my patients, and I'm sure you all saw that during COVID. This man, he was crying because he wanted to be with his wife during Thanksgiving. And I got close to him and I just hugged him and stuff like that. But you saw very little of that. On the contrary, during COVID, you saw people being completely put away and people were dying alone in the hospital. Compassion is one of the things that they don't teach in medical school. And we need to teach that. Not only the technology, not only all the good things. Yeah, science helps, but there has to be some ethical component on it. Technology helps humanity, but compassion is what leads everything that we do. What is the next frontier? Decentralized trials, an ethical artificial intelligence system, and continuation of the medical freedom. My message to young doctors or young people aspiring to become doctors is be curious, be kind, but at the same time, be courageous. I mean, you remember, you are the #1 patient advocate. You have to help people. You are not here just to collect a paycheck, which many of my colleagues did. It is challenging, and it's still very challenging to get a lot of doctors to join this awakening, because at the end of the day, for them, it's either a choice of compliance with the institution or their consciousness. And many of them, they just care about compliance. They don't care about any of this. I believe that courage is the oxygen of truth. Thank you very much.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.